I'm going to say the next Kinnos also, Yud Zayin, page 69. Im Tochalna Noshim Kiri Yomolale Tipuchim. This Kinnos speaks about Achzorius, the cruelty that we were almost forced into. Women actually ate their own children in desperation because of famine and hunger. And this alludes to the third cause of Churban Bayis Rishon, Shvichas Damim, murder. Though Sirtzach is the sixth Dibra, it has 6 letters to remind us that Adam was created on the 6th day as the pinnacle of the Bria, and destroying a human being is like destroying the entire Bria. And therefore Chazal say, Kol ha'ma'abed nefesh achas mi Yisrael kilu ibed olam mole. It's like destroying the entire world. The Rikanti says it's called Shvichas Domi. Why not Shvichas Dam? Why the plural? Because by separating the neshama from the guf, you separate Kibiyachol, the Rabbanu Shalom, from the world. And it's Domim Tarte. Not just the physical Domim, but the spiritual Domim also. Also, like it says by Hevel, called Demei Ochicha, Zaro, Vezera Zaro, you kill somebody, you're not only killing them, you're killing their children and potential grandchildren and great-grandchildren at Sof Kol Adoros. And even though Adam HaRishon was already commanded on Ritzicha, on Shvichas Damim, it's one of the 6 mitzvahs that Adam was given, after the Mabul there was a need to review and repeat that Isser for various reasons. One reason is after people saw a whole world destroyed, the Nei Noach came out and saw a destroyed world. It reduced the chashivas of life in their eyes. So all this destruction. What are we to say where every day you read newspapers, you don't read newspapers, but you can't be oblivious to the fact that all over the world thousands of people are being killed. Syria and Egypt, the Sudan, all over the world. Millions of lives are being lost. You don't have to go that far. How people are derelict with their own children. Beyond me. People can leave their children in a car. And not one and not two. So you think that once it happened, nobody will ever do that again because they see what. And every day, somebody else. Rahman al-Islam. We become insensitive to the value of human life because we see human life being destroyed all over as if it's nothing, and it affects us. Others say that because after the Mabul they were allowed to eat meat, eating meat itself brings achzorius, it brings behemishkeit into a person. You have to be careful with that. And the fact that you can kill animals also brings a person to achzorius, even though it's mutter. But you need to be extra careful now not to kill human beings. The Sforno says that the Havtacha that the Rabban Shem gave that there won't be another Mabul was conditional. Conditional on 2 things: that we were osek in Yeshuvo Shel Olam, that we wouldn't murder, and we'd be osek in Pruervu. But if we're not osek in Binyan HaOlam, and we're involved in Hashchasas HaOlam, whether it's Hashchasas HaOlam actively by killing people, or passively by not creating more people, then we don't deserve the world to exist. And the Rabban Shalom's promise that there won't be Hashchasas Olam and a Mabul doesn't apply, says the Sforno. Rav Shach Ratzal said, Ki b'tzelem Elokim nivra ha'adam. Tzelem Elokim means the Rabban Shalom is the ultimate giver. A person has to be a giver who gives kiyum to the world, not who destroys the world. And therefore, Ki b'tzelem Elokim also es ha'adam. Because of that, the antithesis of Tzelem Elokim is being a murderer and being mashchis the world. The Rebbeinu is a borei olam. He gives to the world, doesn't destroy the world, chas v'sholom. And therefore, taking care of one's health, physically and spiritually, is also tantamount to ritzicha. If you don't take care of your health, then you're murdering yourself. You're committing suicide. Suicide is also asur. It's not mutter a person to kill themselves either. There's a balaturim that the reason by Sarah that it says lifkosa with a small chaf, that Sarah was to blame partially for her death because she was morid din on Avrom Avinu yishbod Hashem beini uveinecha, and kol hamorid din al chaveiro is what's it called? Is nidon causes their own death. So Sarah Inenu was considered almost like a suicide, says the Balaturim. And therefore you're not misabel so much for somebody who committed suicide. Somebody who ignores their physical health or contributes to their spiritual demise is also considered like a rotzeach, like a person who's committing suicide. A person, in order to really appreciate what life is not just the amount of seconds you have from the time you're born to the time you die. Because if that's all that life is, the time that you're born till the time you die and fill it up with pleasure, then life is a very, very dismal, unimportant thing. I always like to compare it to the person waiting outside the delivery room for news of his wife's impending birth. The doctor comes out and says, your wife just gave birth to a baby, but the baby was born with a terminal disease that it can't survive. Your baby's for sure going to die of the disease it was born with. The man says, give me some hope. There's a cure. No, there's no cure. You're looking for a cure. Nah, we gave up long ago. Somebody survived this terrible disease miraculously. Never. Not in the annals of medical history. So I've never heard of such a disease. There's no cure. You're not looking for a cure. No one ever survived it. What's the name of this terrible disease my child was born with? The doctor says, you see, when your child was born, he contracted a disease called life. We don't know how long it's going to take. Some people survive 80 years with it, 90, 100. We don't know how long it's going to take. We know one thing for sure. Whoever was born with the disease called life eventually dies from it. That's what life is. You're born, you begin to die. Imagine if you know how many seconds you're going to live. We're all going to live 120 happy, healthy years. So how many seconds in 120 years? Figure it out. Multiply 365 by 24. That's how many hours, by 120, by 365, by 24, by 60, by 60. That's how many seconds in 120 years. Big number. Put it up on a digital display and put it in the delivery room. And the moment you're born, push the button and the numbers start going down. That could be what Chazal mean when they say Rishoyim b'chayeyim nikroyim meishim. Not that they're dead, but they're dying. That's what life is. You begin to die as soon as you're born. So it's a long death. But that's not what life is. Life doesn't start when we're born. It doesn't end when we leave this world. Our time in this world is a very small portion. Our life started when we were created as neshamas. It continues on as neshamas after this world. The purpose of this world is to create olam haba, and every second, yesh kol olam b'shah achas. Person can be kol olam haba in 1 second. So every second in this world is extremely, eternally important. You can create eternity every second. No matter what level of life you're on. Rahman al-Islam, a person can be in a coma in a hospital. Can't do anything but think. And even if the EEG says flat brain waves, doesn't mean you're not thinking. It could mean that the machine is not sensitive enough to pick up the thought. 20 years they'll make a more sensitive machine, and then they'll have to apologize for unplugging you. Or the machine will never pick up brain activity because you're not thinking anymore through your brain. Your neshama is still connected to your body. You're still alive. Your neshama can think. So big deal, so you can think. But you can think about mitzvahs that you can mekayim thinking. Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, and you can create eternity. And you could think about doing tshuva, change your whole olam haba. Or you could think about doing mitzvahs that you can't do, but Machshava tova, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref l'maaseh. You can do every mitzvah. And in 1 second, you can create eternity. It says that when the Bas Kol went out, or Belezer ben Durdoi was chozer b'tshuva, and the Bas Kol went out, yesh kol no lomo b'shah achas. Rabbi Yehuda Anossi heard this mice and he cried. So it tells the Rosh HaYeshiva, said, what was he crying about? He should have been elated. Why? You can get your Olam Haba in 1 second. He said what he was crying about is because you can do it every second. There's no limit. There's no limit to how much Olam Haba. Olam Haba is eternal and it's infinite. And you can have an infinite amount of eternities. And every second you can create more eternity and more infinity. And how many seconds do we let go through our fingers and nothing? That's what life is all about. Every second of life, from a secular standpoint, life isn't all that important. Person who believes that there's nothing beyond this world, then life is not that important. It's a long death. You begin to die when you're born, and life is just, that's all it is. What kind of important it is? What did I do? I killed somebody. So I took away some seconds of his life. How many? I don't know. Maybe he's going to die of a heart attack the next second. So how much did I take away from him? And therefore, life is only important from a secular standpoint if you have 2 conditions: quality and quantity. If you're 119 and 3/4, so your life's not all that important. How much time do you have left anyway? And even if you're 20 years old, but you're in a coma, right, so how important can life be? What can you do? How many steaks can you eat in a coma? None. How many movies can you see? 0. So you need 2 conditions. You need a lot of life and a nice quality of life. Put the 2 together, life is important. Less than that, there's no intrinsic value. From a Torah standpoint, no matter what level of life you're on, you're in a coma. You can think, you're still alive. You have 1 second left. You have eternity. Every second is intrinsically important. So if we understand what life is all about, that's why Kedusha, understanding what real life is, depends on 2 things. Ish avi v'imo tiro v'yachapsosai tishmor. Kibbud avoim tells me the importance of the physical life, and Shabbos puts it into a perspective that physical life is because you can create Shabbos, Olam Haba, you can create eternity from it. Then life is important. So if we want to really be people who are machshiv life, and not destroy life, and not even be the kind of people who could possibly destroy life, and destroying life doesn't only mean going and killing somebody by shooting them, but it means being careless with other people's lives, with your own life. It means driving and speeding and passing on a blind curve where you're gambling that maybe you'll make it, maybe you won't. And if you don't make it, you won't get any faster to where you're going. Not to where you thought you were going, at least. So a person who's not machshiv life is willing to gamble with his life. And a person who's machshiv life and understands that every second is eternity is not going to take gambles with his life and do things that could endanger his life or other people's lives. And then there are other things that are considered ritzicha. Malvin pnei chaveiro berabim is considered shvichas damim. Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam, the Chafetz Chaim says. Even if you leave the dam inside the person, you can still kill him. How? By malvin pnei chaveiro. And even the Rabbeinu Bachya says, even when you give tochacha, doing a mitzvah, tochacha, you have to make sure that you're not malvin pnei chaveiro. So nicer with the altar from Slabodka. Nosson Shvi Finkel, the altar from Slabodka, used to go in the summertime to a vacation spot for health reasons called Einhausen. And there was a big congregation of reformers. And the rabbiner of those reformers, the rabbi, lived in that city near this vacation spot. And the Reform Jews used to travel on the first day of Rosh Hashanah to be by their rabbi on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Tov. And then the second day, the rabbi traveled to them. So one year, an Avrech Chassid from Hungary also spent his vacation there in this vacation spot. near the Alta from Slobodka. And he was a kanoi, and he went and met this rabbi. And he asked him why he's not mochiach his kehillah that they shouldn't drive on Rosh Hashanah, knowing that the rabbi also drives on Rosh Hashanah the second day, but what's it called? And he knew that he was embarrassing, in those days at least the rabbi was embarrassed of that. It was embarrassing the rabbi. When he came to the Alta from Slobodka to tell him what he did, right, that he was able to really give it to this rabbiner, right, and to embarrass him, right, so Nosson Tzvi said to him, he said that, Lamaisa, you thought you did a mitzvah? The Torah says even if you give tochacha, there's a chiyuv, what's it called? V'lo yisol of chet, v'lo tisol of chet, not to embarrass him. You think you did a mitzvah giving tochacha to this reform rabbi, but you could have done it in a way that didn't embarrass him publicly, right? Or embarrass him even not publicly, right? And you chose to do it in a way that was embarrassing. Then not the mitzvah you didn't do, you didn't have Avera. So don't boast of the great mitzvah you did. Who knows whose Avera is worse, his or yours? The person has to be sensitive, even if he sees other people embarrassing people. Brings a mice over here with Rav Kaplan, that he was, what's it called, somebody found him in the Beis Medrash, almost ready to faint. And they finally found out, they got from him what he was so upset about. He said somebody had, a few minutes before, had embarrassed somebody publicly in front of him. And he said, if I had seen somebody come here and murder somebody, I would be totally disheveled, totally out of my mind. Same thing, of seeing somebody embarrass somebody else publicly is exactly the same thing. He's a mice of the Brisker Rav. They had a meeting in his home, discussed something to do with the shchita and the being masak in various things because the shochtim were not acting properly. And one of the shochtim, who was part of this group, showed up at the meeting. They felt difficult to speak in front of him, so people asked him to leave. And he says he's not leaving until the Brisker Rav tells him to leave. He's in the Brisker Rav's house. I don't leave, what's it called? The Balabos tells me to leave, I'll leave. And the Brisker Rav refused to say anything. And they came to him, begged him, and the whole meeting should go to nothing if you don't throw this person out of your house. And he refused to say anything. Afterwards they asked him why. He said, because the Gemara says in Gittin, Akamtza bar Kamtza Chorav Yerushalayim. Because whatever Bar Kamtza did, right, because he was insulted, and he went then and was Moshav on Klal Yisrael, and you see the Rabban Shalom didn't stop him. You see that the Rabban Shalom, because of the busha that Bar Kamtza experienced, the Rabban Shalom took his side. Even though he may have done terrible things, he was wrong, still, because of that busha to champion some Jew who was insulted, Hechriv Beis HaMikdash, that ended up to be the Churban Beis HaMikdash. So the Brisker Rav said, if I would embarrass this guy and throw him out of my house, and embarrass him publicly, then there'd be no purpose to this meeting. Then the Rebbe Shalom will not give any hatzlacha to the meeting. It wasn't Kedai. It's Kedai, the whole meeting should go with Timoya. But if I had to be Makayim the meeting and think that we're going to accomplish something by being Levaya somebody, it's not going to work. It's Hashem if we understand the whole Musar movement started, they say, because of something that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter saw, and because of that he realized that if he doesn't start a movement to people should be intensify the idea of Musar, then Rahman al-Itzlan, the world's a hefker. The Maisa was, there was a shoemaker, poor shoemaker, who became rich. And he got carried away a little bit with his wealth because he was a newly rich person. And he wanted to make sure that everybody knew who he was and what he was. So he had a chance to marry off one of his daughters, and he made an extravagant chuppah. They got dressed up in the most extravagant clothing, in the most extravagant place. And the people were jealous of this shoemaker who became rich. And especially the other rich people in town felt this newly rich person, who really was a poor shoemaker to begin with, right, was competing with their aristocratic society. So at the chasana, this was his pinnacle of feeling mamish that he made it. Right under the chuppah, one of these rich aristocrats went over under the chuppah with a shoe and said to the guy, "Could you tell me if you could fix this shoe or not?" To embarrass him publicly, that everybody should remember who he really was and where he really came from. The man fainted on the spot from the busha. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, "When I saw that, I realized that Klal Yisrael needed a Musa move. Because if these things could happen in Klal Yisrael, like somebody going and putting a knife in the person under the chuppah of his daughter. No different. If Klal Yisrael can do that, then there's something seriously wrong. It's like the Beis HaMikdash. Somebody, Leman Hashem, Leman to be Zoche b'korbanos hayom, killed the guy next to him, the Kohen next to him, he shouldn't get ahead of him. When Klal Yisrael think that Avodas Hashem is killing people, and being Mevayish people, then they need a tremendous Musar move. So even though, Baruch Hashem, we are far from Shvichas Damim in its simple meaning, we're not very far from all these nuances of what it means to be a Shofech Damim. And if we'll work on being Mesakin, that Gehenna that was caused by Churban Bayis Rishon, and that caused Churban Bayis Rishon, then we'll be able again to be Mesakin another brick the binyan by Shlishi ben HaRav Zev Leff.